Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for today's 30 on Thursday webinar, Understanding Your Server's Health, SharePoint and SQL. Just a little bit about Protiviti before we get started. Protiviti is a global consulting firm that serves more than 40% of Fortune 1000 and Fortune Global 500 companies. We are a full-service enterprise content management team. We've been a Microsoft Gold partner for 14 years and have helped hundreds of clients realize the true value of Microsoft SharePoint. Our 30 on Thursday webinar series is a 30-minute bi-weekly webinar series where we talk all things SharePoint and enterprise content management. Our next webinar will be on October 13th, where we will be helping you solve the I can't find anything on our intranet problem. You can register for that webinar and see our full schedule on our website, ecm.protiviti.com. We are hosting Office 365 roundtables coming up in a city near you. The topic is when to use what in Office 365. You can register for any of these sessions on our website, ecm.protiviti.com/events. Today's webinar is being recorded. You can access the recording of today's session and see all of our past webinar recordings on our YouTube channel. For questions during today's presentation, please insert them in the question window in the GoToMeeting toolbar. We will be saving all the questions until after the presentation. You can also live tweet us your questions at ProtivitiECM using the hashtag 30THealth. Today's presenter is Andy Ariano, Solution Architect here at Protiviti, and I am Julia Marple, and I will be moderating today's session. All right, let's get started. Andy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so everybody should be able to see my screen right now. And
yep, looks good.
Thank you. Yep, thanks for joining. And just going to kind of go through this quickly. There's a lot going on, a lot to present in just a short time. But basically, I approach this in a way that we're trying to understand what's happening, either with your SQL servers, with your Windows servers, with your Active Directory servers. Really, it doesn't matter what server. They're all running services. They're all running an operating system. They've all got some basic common components to them, and we want to understand that better. And so I wanted to share with you a lot of the different tools and techniques that I use when just coming in and trying to solve a very difficult question. So here are the main components, right? We all know this, that you have these different operating systems, applications that we work with day to day, and that they have common devices. We all have storage. So whether that's local disks attached, the DAS, always trying to push this new terminology that's coming through that we see more and more, direct attached storage, or whether it's network storage like a SAN or an iSCSI. So you're either coming through iSCSI, coming through a network storage disk attached like that, or a SAN using fiber channel. Going to have storage on your server. And then networking. We're going to have local NICs, so we might have team NICs, multiple NICs on one server so that we can have redundancy, or might have just one, 1 gig or a 10 gig NIC. And then we're going to have to go through switches. And then if this is highly or probably more of an enterprise type solution, then we'll have load balancing in there as well. So maybe an F5 or a Windows load balancer or some other Blue Coat type load balancer. And then, of course, our machines always have RAM and CPU, right? This has been since day one that have to have our so many gigabytes of RAM, and now we're in the big numbers and running Hyper-V or VMware hosts. So you might see 200 gigs. I've seen them with 132 gigs and all the way 64 gigs, and of course, your own little laptops with 8, 16, or so on. And then CPUs. And CPUs is increasing as well. And so every machine that we work on in a Windows environment is going to have processors. So we need to understand what's happening and then how many processors are available. Is it 2 or 3 physical processors, and then each of them have multi-cores. And so we have so many physical and so many virtual. So this is the basic equipment that we need to understand anytime we walk into an environment. So here's your storage, and some common issues that you're going to have to worry about are corrupt disks. So this is something that sneaks up on you and that you aren't always paying attention to. But disk corruption is really one of the worst things that you can have happen. You go look at your files that you thought were good, and you can't open them because they're not readable. You can have too slow disks, and so you overload a SQL server, and then the I/Os, so the IOPS, the in and out processing per second, isn't able to handle your application of the number of databases, and so things go too slowly, queries time out. Next thing you know, you get failures, and people are reporting that website doesn't work. Failed RAID configurations, and so whether you're using a RAID 1 or a 5 or a 10 or a 0+1, all the different configurations of RAID, these are common things that happen on your disk. And then lost disk, of course. If you're using an iSCSI solution and someone unplugs one of the switches, drives go away, right? You have to reconnect them. You have to either reboot it or just reconnect the iSCSI connection. But these are common issues with storage that you should be aware of. Then networking, we talked a little bit about this already, and knowing that there's switches and load balancing going on. So if we're pinging and we're getting an address, and we need to be aware that maybe we're going through a load balancer and we need to use the host file so that we can actually work locally and figure out, do the websites work here on the local machine versus everyone else is saying it's down, and it's a load balancing issue and has nothing to do with the local SharePoint servers. So knowing about your network is important. And so you also get bad packets coming through or slow transfer rates. Maybe you have slow bandwidth. Maybe somebody's doing a big backup of the entire system and all the SQL databases during the daytime, and so that's making everything run slowly. And then if you have misconfigured switches, maybe you have multiple ins and outs in the same switch, and so then you've got cross lines, and you get slow transfer rates, start to get collisions. High usage as well. So, and that kind of goes back to somebody doing a big backup during the daytime. But you need to know what's the status with my NICs. Am I good with one, or do I need to have two? Is it good with 1 gig, or do I need 10 gigs? Of course, our RAM is going to be allowing us to run processes. Each thread that runs, each executable is going to have to be loaded up into memory, and so that's inside of our RAM, and then that's accessed quickly, as we all know, and then disk is a little bit slower, and so if we have to use a page file to hold some of our processing going on, then things start to run a little bit slower, and so we need to know, how is the RAM? Is it highly used? Do we have too much? You don't want to give 32 gigs to a virtual machine when really you only needed 16. So you've taken away gigs from some other applications that you own, and it also costs money, right? So the server team, whoever's running the VMware host or whoever's running the main machine, nobody likes to shell out dollars for RAM when it's not needed. So we need to understand, are we at a good number or a bad number? Are we low or high? And then also other things that may not come to mind, but you look at a SQL server and you're seeing that the SQL server is acting very oddly. The RAM doesn't seem like it's the right numbers, and the issue has nothing to do with giving enough or enough RAM resources. The issue is that it's not dedicated. So knowing what the best practices are on your machines. So if you have a virtual machine, then we should be using dedicated RAM and not shared RAM. And that's just part of the best practices coming out of Microsoft. So those little things like that we need to be aware of when we talk about what's happening with the RAM on a machine. And so CPUs, we talked already about this, and whether it's physical, how many physical cores we have, or CPUs, processors, and then how many cores are there, that we can know that they have 2 physical, but there's 4 cores, so really I have 8 processors working in tandem. And so common issues, over-allocating. We can't give every machine 4 processors, and we have 5 machines running. That's 20 processors when there's only 16 available, right? So we've over-allocated. So we need to know how many are possible, especially if we're working in a virtual environment. So if my virtual machine has 64 total processors, then I need to make sure I stay under that number. or near that number so I don't over-allocate. So, and then also getting too little for a particular app. For you, if you're coming in and you're managing a SharePoint environment, the biggest thing that you should be looking at is your search, because you know that search runs those node runner processes, and so each node runner process takes up about 600 megabytes of RAM, and so when you get 4 of them running, then it's 2.4 gigs just for that, and then not just the RAM, but the processing that happens. You know, you're going to peak out at 100% processor if you only have two processors. So the percent process utilization is going to peak out if you have 2, and even if you have 4, if you have 500,000 items and you're trying to index those in the daytime and you have 4 processors, that's going to be very difficult. And so we need to readjust, realign how many processors we're granting to each application based on their roles. So it's important to know, is it high or low, and what's that number? And how do we figure that out? So these are the common tools, and so these are tools that I've been using for the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years at least. That some of these I've learned about recently. Some of them I learned about in 2008, 2009. Some of them I learned and picked up through the DOJ. Some of these, or 2012, and some of these are tools that are kind of being revamped and recreated for you. And so you may not have thought about them last, maybe 2 years ago, but right now they're very relevant and they're getting better and better. And so I'll walk through these, and this really, if you want to diagnose somebody, you need to know, be able to look into that object and see a little bit deeper, right? If you walk into your doctor's office and the doctor doesn't have any tools to diagnose you, so they don't have a stethoscope, they don't have an x-ray, they don't have anything, they just look at you visually and say, yeah, you look good. You know that you wouldn't trust that doctor. And so really we as administrators coming in to manage an environment or assist in helping manage an environment, we really need to have our tool bag, and these are the really common ones. So Procmon. So Procmon is from Cisternals, and it's coming out of Microsoft. It used to be something that was dedicated to the Cisternals suite, and that was like in 2007, where you had this big suite of tools that could do tons of things. It was an awesome disk. But now there's little pieces that are here and there, and so this is one of the little tools, Procmon, and basically it lets you see every process running on your system, and then what that process is doing, where it's reading from, and then what's the result. If the process can't read to something, so somebody changed permissions on a folder, you're going to catch it here. If the process is looking for a file that doesn't exist anymore, so your web.config went corrupt, you're going to find it here. This is a very useful tool, and then you can filter it and do a bunch of things with it, and you could spend, an hour or more easily on Procmon just talking about what it can do. So you should be aware of this tool and checking it out, and this is one of the things that we use. So Process Explorer, I'm not going to go through the whole Cisternal suite, but I think that this is another one that needs to be mentioned, where it does a lot more than just what your task manager can do, and you're able to search for DLLs and threads and handles that are actually being used. So this is a very, very useful tool, and it does a lot of things like Task Manager, but it has much more to it as well. So something that you should be looking at and trying to understand and use more. And if there's an issue where I have to work on it, or someone on the team, I think that for sure you'll see us bringing this tool up. Of course, Resource Monitor. This is Resource Monitor is really a mix. It's kind of a mix between Netmon and Wireshark, and then Procmon and the Process Explorer. It's a mix of different things, but in this case, I wanted to look at my network, and so you can see that I'm able to look at the network, and I can see that this machine is talking right now, and it's using port 1433 on the local port, and it's reaching out to my external machine, which must be like a SharePoint server, and it's using this port remotely. But I can see, say for example, I'm on my SharePoint server, and the website won't come up. I can bring up Resource Monitor very quickly, and I can tell easily where it's going. I don't even need to know what the name of the database server is. It could have an alias. So I can see what IP it is, and that it's 1433, and I know that my SharePoint machine is talking to a SQL server somewhere and what the IP is. Then I can go log into that server where the SQL is located and see to make sure everything's running there. But it's just a very, very useful tool. You know, if you're sending mail, your SharePoint server won't send mail. Well, then when I kick off a mail process, like say I create a dummy workflow and it just is a workflow that sends an email, then I can come here real quick and I can see that something's coming out or it's not coming out of my port 25. It's not coming out of port 25 to my mail SMTP server. Well, then I need to go look at my services at SMC, right, or MSC, and make sure that that simple mail transport is running. So this tool is very, very good. It can also show you things like, you know, what certain processes are really hitting and causing the highest peaks, and the memory and how it's being allocated, and lets you filter in so many different ways. So Resource Monitor is something that's been added to the Windows stack, and it's really something we should all be using now, I think. So PerfMon. PerfMon's always been there on your servers. You've all seen it, Performance Monitor. It's even better now, and it's so much easier where you've got these great tools to be able to create your counters and your diagnostics and collect. And so, you know, common problems you have are, well, I'm not sure what's causing my high CPU. It happens every night at 2 a.m. How do we find it? So we can go out, we can buy a third-party tool, which they're great, and I do that often. And if it's customers, a big enterprise customer, that's probably the right move. We get something professional. But if we have a smaller budget and we can't do that, we can run PerfMon, and then we can run and capture the processor utilization, and we can see when it spikes. And at the same time, we can do processes and capture processes running. So you capture every process running on the machine, and then you would see the correlation between a spike in the CPU and the spike in the processor processor time. But PerfMon, we can tell it collect from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. and don't go over 20 megs today when you collect. That way we can control if we have a limited disk space on our operating system. Well, then we can tell it to make sure our log files don't get too large, and then they prune automatically by themselves. So we can quickly set up monitoring and leave that running, and you can have a baseline, or you can have, you know, over time historical analysis. So really, PerfMon is just, and the footprint on your server is tiny. You're not gonna, it barely takes up anything. Like I have a machine that's really over allocated on very little RAM, very little CPU for what it does, and PerfMon can run on there, and it does not impact it. And it's just a great tool. So you should be using PerfMon, or at least this is the common tool that I think is great. So the event viewer. Yes, we've all seen the event viewer, and you get all these red marks in there, and that's not nice. But you can see, what I've done was I've tried to capture errors in the last 12 hours. And so these custom views in the new event viewer, you know, it's new only in a sense, you know, it's been around since 2012, right? I think 2008 we might have been able to do it too, but there's just a lot happening here and a lot of new additions that they've created for us that we should be aware of. And so being able to create these custom views, and so we can set up something and say, give me a custom view for disk errors. Give me a custom view for failed logins. Give me a custom view for service restarts or IIS resets. Then we can quickly go and see exactly what's happening in certain time frames. In this case, last 12 hours, but we can set that to be 1 hour or 7 days or whatever that number is that makes sense for us to analyze. And not only can we quickly filter and organize the events, that's the new feature here, but we can right-click any event we want, and then we can create a task for it. So you can say, alert me every time this disk starts to fill up, or alert me every time that IIS resets. You know, somebody gets added to the security team or the administrators group. Whatever that event is that you want, you can create the event and just right-click it, attach a task to it, and then use your PowerShell and run a PowerShell file and do the send mail message, and then now you're being notified automatically from the system when something's happening, and you can be more proactive and better manage the servers. So just really powerful tool, and so it's the event viewer with your task scheduler kind of combined together. And IO meter. So IO meter is use when we're trying to figure out, are my disks good enough? You know, did I buy 7,200 you know, RPMs, or do I need 10K? Do I need 15Ks? What type of disk do I need? And then, are they the right capacity? And so you'll probably be, you know, more worried about running IO meter on your SQL machines and making sure that your data drive, your log drive, and your temp DBs are in the right disk. You know, they've been allocated the right disk. And so you should be typically looking and running a baseline before you build out an environment. That way you can see how it acts, or what's the max you can get, and then after you put everything on there, test it. And so you can see here that the total IOs, I'm at 1192. This is a virtual machine, which is very good. That's actually a good number. It's a rated disk attached to this virtual machine, and so that's why I expected that. But IO meter is what we're going to use when we're trying to figure out, is there something happening on my disk that's making them go too slow, or are these disks the right types of disks for my application? You know, I'm in a big enterprise. I've got 20,000 users. I get 10K users each day. Can we handle it? Can my SQL handle this? Can the SharePoint disk handle it? So here's another tool, and of course you've probably seen this one, but you know, you're not going to. You can use the event viewer, and we could capture this event here, event 7. For the disk having a bad block. So knowing that, and then being able to say, okay, we need to replace this disk, and we need to do a backup, identify what files have been corrupted, and then possibly restore from a backup. And then you can also run this check disk and then have that emailed to you. So you could use PowerShell and email the results of a check disk to you, and then you would have that and be able to look at that. That'd be something that you do, you know, as a maintenance, as preventive maintenance, do that on a weekly basis, and check out that log file that comes emailed to you, and see if you have any issues. Or you could go the PowerShell and the task scheduler route and email you every time this event comes through. And if you don't go, if you want to take one step up, then you're going to get a third-party monitoring tool. And this is going to help you understand the systems as well. So in a case like this, we can monitor from memory, and we can see over time, is our memory at 60% on average, or is it at 90%? You know, if we're at 20% and we've allocated 32 gigs of RAM to our machine, then we know that that's too much. We're wasting probably, you know, 50% of the RAM. We should be running at about 60% utilization of memory or CPU at all the time. So that way you're not wasting resources. And every now and then you'll see a spike, but that should be happening during backups or during, let's say you're doing a full crawl on your search server, so that's when you would see that the spike happens, and that would be normal. But third-party tool is going to let you capture stuff in a lot easier way than what I've listed so far. You know, Perfmon probably can compare, but not if we have to do 20 machines. So if we're going to do 20 machines, we might want to get something like What's Up Gold or System Center to monitor it. Or in this case here, Hostmon is another tool that you can use. You know, there's SolarWinds has a tool. There's all kinds of tools out there to do monitoring, but you'll want to set something up so that you can monitor the threshold. So if it stays over 80% for over 15 minutes, then email me. And then just the basic monitoring of where is it on average, and then your stop-start. So in this case, this environment, it depends on an ISO server. And if the ISO server goes down, well, then nobody's going to get out to the network because everything goes through a proxy. So we need to know that the ISO server is running, and if it's not running, then we need this tool to restart the service. So if my ISO server does a reboot, it gets patched, it reboots, it comes up, but my ISO SQL doesn't come online, then I need to start it. And that's what the tool can do for us, and that can be at 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning. But you know, it's going to save you calls for the next day, and we want to avoid as many calls as possible and keep our machines running all the time. So of course, PowerShell. You know, I mentioned the send mail message, but you can do so much more with PowerShell. And if you're going to be using PowerShell, you know, I recommend that you would install the ISE. So just go to the Add Windows feature, and you install the PowerShell ISE. And that integrated scripting environment, it's just a little bit nicer. You know, it's kind of like got the intelligent type ahead, and you can highlight something and run that one specific section of your code if you wanted to. So you can run a little snippet, kind of like you do in the SQL command, the SSMS, the SQL Management Studio. But PowerShell has so many different commands available, and you can do this get modules, get the list, get modules for your environment. You can see all the different modules you can import. And then for us, we always import the PF snap-in, so it's the Microsoft.SharePoint.PowerShell. So always importing that snap-in, and then what that does is, it's like if I'm going to go do a roofing job, I need my roofing tool. So when I add in that snap-in, I've got all my SharePoint tools. If I want to work on Active Directory, then I'm going to upload the Active Directory module, import, Active Directory module. So, and then you get these little commands that you can do things like this: get counter memory available bytes. You can see it comes back, and we can do this for all the machines in our environment or just a specific set. So if maybe you work with a bigger team, but you can't quite get the service and response that you would like to set up your monitoring, then you can do this on your own. And this PowerShell, you can schedule it through Task Scheduler and capture these numbers in a database easily, and then you would be more independent, right? You can always work through the central team, your central organization team, or buy the bigger tool, like I said. But you can do a lot of this stuff with PowerShell to check your server's health, whether that's looking at disk or looking at memory or processes or anything. PowerShell will probably have a command by this time to do it. And of course, T-SQL, another command language that is really useful, especially with SharePoint. So we know that on SharePoint we have a couple of databases that are always giving us a hard time. So it's going to be your search databases, your config database, those two probably, and the WSS logging. So those databases, those three, we need to keep an eye on them and make sure that if we want to have full transactions on, so we have full logging versus simple logging, right? We put full because we want to cluster. We want to use always on. So we need to have full logging on. But when we do have full logging, we need to make sure that the databases don't get oversized, because SharePoint can easily blow up and take up 60 gigs of disk space. And so you have a machine and you allocated 100 gigs, and all of a sudden one of them just blows up and becomes 60 gigs. It's taking up 60% of your overall disk space, and now everything stops because there's no more space left. And that can happen very easily with your search, with your logging, or with the config file. So being able to look at this and getting numbers, you can see here that I've got everything at 514 megs, which is tiny. That's perfect. Any log file inside SharePoint, I wouldn't worry about it if it was 2 gigs. But once it goes to 4 gigs and never comes down, and it goes to 30 gigs, you know you got a problem. So we need to set up maintenance schedules and the like, and just make sure that we're addressing it each night so we can handle and take care of the databases. Also with the T-SQL, there are some nice commands out there, and you'll look for a for each. So you have the ability to run a stored procedure and do a for each, and so I can do a for each, and I can do something like a DBCC, check DB. So I can check every database for corruption nightly, and probably every person who's worked as a SQL admin has been doing that, and then gets emailed when it fails. So that's something important that you should be aware of, is because we're in SharePoint, that means we have a leg over on the SQL side, and so we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the SQL databases, especially the sizes. And of course the command tool. So command prompt, I think we all use all the time. So the IP config, the NS lookup, the sc.exe, tons of things that you do with command prompt. If you just look at command prompt and look at different ways you can use that online, and even with the batch file. I remember one time we were trying to monitor the network, and so we set up a next copy and copied a file from one location to the other, and then kept track of the start time and the end time. Then we were able to see what time of night that the whole network was saturated, because that file would not copy any longer. And then able to determine there's something happening on one of the switches at this remote data center. So command prompt is a great tool, and I'm sure that I put some of these on the end because you guys use this all the time, like Explorer. A neat way to use Explorer is copy over something and check out your speed right here. This speed in a good environment is going to be 25, 30. And then in a really great environment, you'll see it at 70. So if you copy something, a big file, and you see 30 megabytes, give your server guys a pat on the back because that's a very fast environment. If you see 70, maybe take them to lunch. If you see 5, you might want to give them a hand if that's slow. Okay, guys, that's it. Those are some of the main tools I use all the time and tools that you'll want to look into more. And hopefully you get to use them in your environment. And if you need anything, just let us know. We can definitely lend a hand. So thanks. I'll take some questions if there's time.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, we're a little bit past the top of the hour, but we will get to a couple questions here really quick. We did have a question about the recording of today's webinar. The recording will be on our YouTube channel. Someone had a question about how often do you recommend checking on our SQL files?
Yeah, I would set up a job on those probably at least weekly. What happens with the SQL is when the backups occur, which is probably going to be, every weekend, and you may have full backups going Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and if you did, you'd want to check them more often. And with a remote tool or one of these third-party tools, you can just check every log file for its overall size and get that emailed to you only if the size is, like I said, if it's over 2 gigs, then there's an issue. If you have a log file that stays, let's say 4 gigs or 5 gigs all the time in SharePoint, then that's something we can fix, right? It's something you want to address ahead of time. So we'll definitely check it weekly at least and after each full backup.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andy, for the great presentation. Thank you all for joining us today. We will see you in 2 weeks where we talk about finding things in your intranet and search. Have a great day.